Dixon Paul sat frozen in his corner of the boardroom, the hum of fluorescent lights above mixing with the pounding of his heart. Precious Esther's calm authority was suffocating. Every board member, every advisor, every lawyer present nodded subtly in her direction. He realized with a mix of disbelief and horror that every contract, every major decision, and every asset he had assumed he owned was legally under her control. Precious didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The law, the documents, the contracts, those were her instruments of power. She spoke softly, but each word carried weight. "Mr. Paul," she said, "the company you've been managing is held in a trust that was established before your marriage. All shares are legally mine. Your decisions as managing director were always subject to my authority. You were never the sole owner." Dixon's face flushed, a mixture of rage, shame, and disbelief. "You what? How is this even possible?" His voice cracked, betraying the panic he tried to suppress. Flashback. Years ago. Gabriel David, Precious's father, had meticulously built a silent empire, distributing shares through a series of trusts that protected the company from outsiders. He had given his daughter the final authority, knowing that greed and ambition often blind people to the truth. "Power," he had said, "doesn't need to be announced. It must simply exist. Wait until they underestimate you." Back in the present, Precious allowed a moment of silence. She let the truth settle into the room. Dixon's arrogance, which had once dominated every conversation, now seemed petty and fragile. The room absorbed the tension, recognizing the quiet genius in her strategy. Sandra Cole, standing beside him, gasped lightly. Even she had never imagined this. The glamorous life she believed she was building with Dixon suddenly felt hollow. The applause of investors and colleagues faded as murmurs of amazement filled the boardroom. Dixon stumbled over words, trying to reclaim authority, but the documents she presented were irrefutable. Every clause, every signed certificate, every recorded shareholder vote, it all pointed to one undeniable fact. He had been managing her empire all along. Completely unaware, Precious spoke again, calmly, without accusation. "I didn't seek revenge. I sought responsibility. Your arrogance made you blind. And yet it was never about taking from you. It was always about protecting what was entrusted to me." The room held its breath. Dixon's pride shattered quietly. He realized that the woman he had dismissed, mocked, and left behind was not only his equal, but had always been the true architect of their shared success. Flashback. Late nights of paperwork, hidden legal agreements, strategic decisions, all carried out silently, with patience and foresight. Gabriel David's advice echoed in her mind. Let them think they've won. Wait for the moment when truth speaks louder than their arrogance. Dixon's voice was barely audible. All this time?" "Yes," Precious replied softly. "All this time." The room was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers. In that silence, Dixon understood fully the cost of underestimating her. Humility, regret, and a profound lesson about pride. The twist wasn't just in ownership, it was in perception. The man who believed he had conquered had been a pawn, unknowingly carrying the weight of her empire while thinking it was his own. And for Precious, the revelation wasn't vengeance, it was freedom. The boardroom remained frozen for a moment, the weight of truth pressing on everyone present. Dixon Paul, once confident and untouchable, sat slumped in his chair, the reality of his misjudgment sinking in. All his years of ambition, all his bravado, all his celebrations, they had been illusions. Precious Esther had been quietly, relentlessly in control all along. She looked at him not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm clarity that cut deeper than any accusation could. "Dixon," she said, "you left me with nothing, yet you never realized I already owned everything. Ownership isn't always visible. Sometimes it waits for the right moment to reveal itself." Dixon's chest tightened. I thought I had it all," he admitted, voice trembling. I didn't see." "You didn't look," she replied simply. The words were sharp yet gentle, like a scalpel removing the illusion of superiority he had carried for years. Flashback. Precious remembered all the late nights she had spent studying the trust documents, meeting with advisors, quietly making decisions that no one would notice. Each step had been deliberate, a calculated patience taught to her by her father. She had learned the most powerful form of revenge wasn't destruction, it was preparation, foresight, and integrity. Back in the present, the investors and board members looked on with awe. They saw not just a woman reclaiming authority, but a story of endurance, intelligence, and quiet power triumphing over arrogance and betrayal. Even Sandra Cole, who had believed she was entering a partnership of convenience, looked at Precious with a mix of respect and disbelief. Dixon's pride, once so loud and untouchable, was reduced to silence. He realized how deeply he had underestimated her, not just as a partner, but as a person. Every dismissal, every insult, every selfish assumption now weighed heavily on him. Precious stood, her posture graceful but firm. "I'm not here to destroy you," she said. "I'm here to do what's right for the company, for the people who trusted us, and for myself. You will learn humility, and I will reclaim my life." The emotional punch was total. Viewers could feel the shift. Betrayal replaced by enlightenment, arrogance replaced by respect, loss replaced by empowerment. Precious walked out of the room with her head held high, leaving Dixon to confront his own reflection in the glossy glass walls of the office. Foreshadowing fulfilled itself. The man who thought he had won lost far more than money. The woman he dismissed found freedom, control, and self-respect. The empire had always been hers, her father's foresight, her discipline, her patience, the invisible power. She had quietly held, and now it was hers in full dot as she stepped outside into the Lagos skyline. The city's lights seemed to celebrate her triumph. Not revengeful, not bitter, but victorious in the way only true resilience allows. The story closed with a lesson universal and enduring. Never underestimate the quiet, the patient, or the prepared. Sometimes those who seem to have nothing are the ones holding everything. And Dixon? He would never forget the woman he left behind.
The small apartment smelled faintly of old paper and rain, a reminder that life's simplest places often held the greatest truths. Evelyn Clarke opened the drawer where she had hidden her father's envelope for years. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but anticipation. The envelope, sealed in heavy cream paper and tied with a thin black ribbon, felt heavier than the weight of all the pain Jonathan had caused her. She remembered her father's words clearly. True power, Evelyn, is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It waits for the moment it matters most. At the time, she had laughed softly, thinking the lesson was abstract. Now, in the wake of betrayal, those words were a lifeline. Evelyn opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents, property deeds, and shares in multiple companies, including Jonathan's main holdings. All legally registered under trusts her father had established long before she ever met him. Every signature, every clause, every document confirmed the truth she had never dared to imagine. She owned far more than Jonathan. Realized the room felt alive with possibilities. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of despair now had a purpose. The irony was profound. He had flaunted wealth he assumed was his alone. Unaware that his so-called victory was actually built on assets he had only managed for her. Flashback her. Father had once taken her to the old family estate in Ikoyi. Some people measure power with gold and cars, Evelyn. But the true measure is control over destiny. Never show your hand until you are ready. She had listened, fascinated, as he explained the importance of patience and foresight. He had left her not just an inheritance, but a blueprint for strategy and success. Back in the present, Evelyn began working quietly, consulting her advisors, and tracing the full extent of her influence. She reached out to her legal team, reaffirmed her authority in the companies, and began mapping the alliances Jonathan had ignored. She wasn't just reclaiming what was hers, she was building an empire within his empire, silently, invisibly, strategically. Meanwhile, Jonathan continued his display of arrogance. At a high-profile gala that evening, he laughed with investors and friends, oblivious to the silent storm growing beneath his feet. Every confident gesture, every boast about success, every underestimation of Evelyn's potential was a step closer to his downfall. The Lagos skyline glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. But inside Evelyn's mind, a brighter vision shone, one of control, justice, and empowerment. She didn't feel the need for revenge yet. The timing had to be perfect. In Nigerian folktales, patience often yields the most devastating and satisfying justice. She paused for a moment, holding the documents against her chest. He thinks he left me with nothing. He has no idea that everything he believes is his has always been mine. A quiet, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. Foreshadowing pulsed in every heartbeat. The arrogant often fall because they fail to see what lies beneath the surface. Evelyn had been underestimated, dismissed, ignored, and now she held the ultimate advantage. The storm had begun, and Jonathan's empire was unaware that its foundation was already shifting beneath him. Jonathan. Harris leaned back in his office chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He should have felt invincible. He had everything a man could want: wealth, prestige, admiration. Yet, for the first time in months, a shadow of doubt flickered in his eyes. Contracts he had overseen for years were suddenly flagged by auditors. Key investors questioned minor decisions, citing irregularities he hadn't noticed. Small whispers in the boardroom grew into hushed concerns. Jonathan blamed overwork, not the reality. Evelyn Clarke was quietly reclaiming control of his empire, back in her modest apartment. Evelyn sat at a sleek desk her friends had helped her set up. Documents spread before her like the pieces of a chessboard. Every move she made was deliberate. Every alliance she nurtured, every investment she reasserted, was calculated to undermine Jonathan without confrontation. Flashback to her father. Robert Clarke had often told her, "Power isn't always loud. It can be invisible. The quietest hand can shift the heaviest weight. Remember this, Evelyn." That lesson now guided every action she took. Evelyn contacted the board under the guise of formalities. Meetings that Jonathan assumed were routine now included her legally recognized as a stakeholder he had never anticipated. Shareholding shifted subtly. Strategic partners, previously loyal only to Jonathan's ego, began responding to her vision. Jonathan noticed these changes but dismissed them as coincidence. He laughed at the rumors circulating in the office. Evelyn. She couldn't affect my empire if she tried. Confidence, as it turned out, would be his undoing. One evening, Evelyn hosted a small, private dinner with Samuel Peterson and Margaret Lewis, planning the next phase. Patience, she said softly, is more than waiting. It's watching, learning, knowing when to act. We don't strike until the moment is perfect. Meanwhile, Jonathan basked in his arrogance. A gala that night was a showcase of his self-perceived triumph. Cameras flashed, investors toasted, and he smiled, completely unaware that the foundation of everything he flaunted belonged, legally and strategically, to Evelyn. Foreshadowing tightened its grip. The proud often stumble on invisible traps, while the underestimated quietly prepare for the reveal. Every small misstep, Jonathan Medevry ignored document. Every casual assumption added another brick to the wall that would eventually confine him. Evelyn looked at the skyline, Legos glittering below like a sea of possibilities. Her fingers hovered over a folder labeled Harris Holdings. Inside were the documents that would one day shift the balance completely. For now, she remained invisible, a ghost in the empire she was about to reclaim. The city hummed outside, unaware that a quiet revolution was underway. Jonathan thought he had erased her from the picture. He had no idea that the woman he believed powerless was not just planning her return, she was controlling the entire game from the shadows. "Let him celebrate," she whispered, eyes shining with quiet fire. "The storm will come, and he will see what he never noticed." Jonathan Harris awoke to the first crack of unease like a distant tremor. Emails flagged urgent issues he had no memory of approving. Board members questioned decisions he had assumed were routine. Small financial irregularities began to compound into reports that demanded explanation. The empire he believed unshakable was subtly shifting under him, and he didn't yet understand why. Meanwhile, Evelyn Clarke reviewed the day's updates from her legal and financial teams. Every subtle move she had made over the past months was now taking shape. Strategic partners who had once deferred to Jonathan's ego were now quietly aligning with her. Investors who had dismissed her as powerless were now calling for meetings. Seeking her guidance, flashback, her father, Robert Clarke, had always spoken in measured tones about human nature. Arrogance blinds the strongest. Those who think the world owes them loyalty forget the quiet hand that guides destiny. Wait, Evelyn. Wait until the moment they cannot ignore you. She had understood the lesson intellectually before, but now, emotionally and strategically, she lived it. Jonathan, oblivious, hosted another lavish event that evening, surrounded by cameras, celebrities, and investors. He smiled broadly, laughing at jokes and flaunting wealth he thought was untouchable. Yet behind the polished surface, small, invisible threads of influence had begun to constrict him. Contract approvals were delayed. Legal notices from banks he didn't remember interacting with arrived mysteriously. Board votes quietly shifted. The walls of his empire, meticulously constructed on arrogance, were showing cracks. Evelyn's presence was invisible, but her power was undeniable. She had remained silent while Jonathan celebrated victory, underestimated while he basked in self-congratulation. Now, every subtle misstep and every ignored protocol was the result of her careful orchestration. One evening, Evelyn met with her close allies, Margaret Lewis and Samuel Peterson. At a quiet rooftop cafe overlooking Lagos, she spread the documents across the table like a map. "We're almost ready," she said softly, her eyes shining. "The public reveal doesn't come yet. But the board, the investors, and his pride, they will all feel the shift before he even knows what hit him." Foreshadowing pulsed like the heartbeat of the city below. Pride blinds. Patience empowers, and the underestimated always holds the power of surprise. Jonathan believed he controlled the narrative. Evelyn had been writing it quietly from behind the scenes, with every step perfectly calculated. As night fell over Lagos, the skyline reflected in the penthouse windows where Jonathan laughed, unaware of the storm brewing in the shadows. Every glance at his portfolio, every interaction with investors, every celebration of his so-called victory. Evelyn had already moved the pieces in her favor. The game had shifted invisibly, yet irrevocably. She allowed herself a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. Soon, Jonathan's arrogance would collide with reality. Soon the man who thought he had left her with nothing would discover the truth. Everything he prized had always been hers to command. The boardroom was packed with investors, partners, and media representatives. Jonathan Harris, confident as ever, leaned back in his chair, convinced that he was about to close yet another Delan empire, secured by what he believed was his brilliance alone. His smirk carried arrogance, and his laughter echoed like a proclamation of victory. Then Evelyn Clarke entered. Silence swept across the room. She wore a crisp navy suit, her posture commanding, eyes steady and unwavering. The whispers began immediately. "Isn't that the woman he divorced? She left him penniless, didn't she?" Evelyn smiled subtly. Calmly, she approached the table where Jonathan sat, still wearing his self-assured grin. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said, voice even but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I believe it's time for a few clarifications." Jonathan's smirk faltered. He felt a tremor of unease he hadn't experienced before. "Evelyn, what are you?" She held up the sealed documents she had retrieved months ago, the documents proving her ownership of the company's shares. Investments and multiple assets Jonathan had assumed were solely his. "These are my holdings," she stated clearly. "The trusts, the investments, the companies, all legally registered under my name. Every decision you've made in this empire, you've been managing it for me." A shock rippled across the room. Investors gasped quietly. Colleagues exchanged incredulous glances. Jonathan's eyes widened in disbelief, the arrogance draining from his face. His empire, the life he flaunted, was not his to command. He had believed he left her with nothing. Yet everything he prided himself on belonged legally to Evelyn. Flashback. Evelyn remembered her father's words vividly. "True power does not boast. It waits. When the moment arrives, it speaks louder than any anger or shouting could. Every act of patience, every quiet alliance, every unseen move had led to this moment. Jonathan stammered, searching for words. This isn't possible." "It is," Evelyn said calmly, voice steady as steel. "You underestimated me, dismissed me, and believed my worth was nothing. And while you celebrated your false victory, I quietly reclaimed what was always mine." The room fell into stunned silence. Evelyn didn't humiliate Jonathan. She didn't gloat. Instead, she projected a quiet confidence that left everyone, him included, realizing that her triumph was not born of vengeance, but of intelligence, patience, and strategy. Foreshadowing fulfilled itself. Jonathan had believed that arrogance, dominance, and public perception were enough to define reality. Evelyn had shown that true power is often invisible, patient, and undeniable as the press cameras clicked and investors acknowledged her authority. Evelyn whispered to herself, almost in reflection, "He thought he left me with nothing, but everything has always been mine." The moral hung in the air like a Nigerian folktale, the underestimated. The patient and the wise often hold the greatest strength. Pride blinds. Patience empowers. Destiny favors those who respect it. Evelyn Clarke stepped forward, not just as a victor, but as a symbol of resilience, strategy, and empowerment. Lagos thrived below, unaware of the storm that had passed quietly through boardrooms and hearts. Jonathan Harris, once arrogant and dismissive, now understood, too late, that the quiet, patient, and wise could change the course of any life, any empire, and any destiny.